my career doing UX design and user research, but telling everybody I was more of a UX strategist until I realized that what I've been doing for most of my career was in fact product management. I very much enjoy the process of helping product teams make iterative and strategic decisions about the direction of their product. And right now I am, as Erin said, the Deputy Director of Product at the All of Us research program. I'm giving a very short and shameless plug because we are going to be hiring senior product and project managers shortly. So please reach out if you're interested. But I started talking about this particular talk when I was at Ventero working with some of the lovely organizers of this meetup. And we started discussing the intersection of design and agile. And so while I'm no longer a designer, so to speak, I believe that everything can be designed and that there's a lot we can learn as agile practitioners from the design community. So today I wanted to talk to you about the design double diamond in particular. The double diamond is the name of a design process model developed by the British Design Council in 2005. And that design council team reviewed many methodologies and tools of lots of organizations that they deemed were good at design, that they had a good design process. And they tried to distill the patterns that they saw through those organizations and came up with this model. But before we can get into why I think this is relevant to you, I want to take a step back. This is an excerpt from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's speaking about problem solving using intuition. I'm just going to read this here. We have all heard such stories of expert intuition. The chess master who walks past a street game and announces, "White mates in 3," without stopping. Or the physician who makes a complex diagnosis after a single glance at a patient. Expert intuition strikes us as magical, but it's not. Indeed, each of us performs feats of intuitive expertise many times a day. Most of us are pitch perfect in detecting anger in the first word of a telephone call. Recognize as we enter the room that we are the subjects of the conversation, and quickly react to subtle signs that the driver of the car in the next lane is dangerous. Our everyday intuitive abilities are no less marvelous than the striking insights of an experienced firefighter or physician, only more common. The psychology of accurate intuition involves no magic. Perhaps the best short statement of it is by the great Herbert Simon, who studied chess masters and showed that after thousands of hours of practice, they come to see the pieces on the board differently from the rest of us. You can feel Simon's impatience with the methodologizing of expert intuition when he writes, "The situation has provided a cue. This cue has given the expert access to information stored in memory, and the information provides the answer. Intuition is nothing more and nothing less than recognition." So Daniel Kahneman simplifies human cognition into two systems. System 1 is the fast thinker, the intuition, and system 2 is the slow thinker. I think it's an oversimplification, but I still enjoyed the book because it makes you reflect on how human cognition, the way you think, affects your decision-making and your perception of the world. Here, he's making a case for the usefulness of System 1. It's very useful in mastering decisions that appear similar to the things you've seen in the past. This pattern recognition could get you in trouble, though. It could get you in trouble like this toddler who is incorrectly intuited that the way to interact with this object is to tap and swipe, like her iPad. From a very early age, we're able to find patterns, relate those patterns to things we've seen or experienced in the past, and then come to conclusions about what to do next. This is what makes very experienced practitioners good at their job. They've seen enough past experience that they can usually intuit the right solution to the problem that's in front of them. But I think that experienced practitioners also know that it's sometimes difficult to intuit problems without some more analysis. So there are lots of tools that generally fall under the category of root cause analysis. These techniques can help you to take the time, switch into system 2, to interpret that situation and come to a different conclusion about the causal factor that you're facing. I do have a couple of problems with these tools though. The first is that they don't speak at all to the solutioning process. So you've discovered there's a problem, but what next? But mostly I think they risk oversimplifying the problem, indicating that there is a root problem at all. Now, in the hands of an experienced practitioner, these tools still have the potential of illuminating the relationships between causal factors. But you have to be diligent not to just ask 5 whys and assume that that's the problem, especially if, as with most organizational problems, you're dealing with a wicked problem. A wicked problem, by definition, has innumerable causes, and it doesn't have a right answer. How many of you have seen an initial problem, have applied root cause analysis tools, have iterated on some solutions, and finally come to the conclusion that this is more complicated than we thought? I think that most design problems, product problems, organizational problems, process problems, they're wicked. We speak about them in terms of the problem, and even in today's presentation, I'll refer to the problem definition, but in fact, it's more like a problem space, a world of causes and no one right solution. Unfortunately, I don't have a magic bullet to wicked problems, but I did want to take the time tonight to reframe the process of defining your complex and wicked problems and attempting to find solutions. So here's my tool. The design double diamond is a series of purposefully divergent and convergent thinking. You can think of divergent thinking as brainstorming, there's no such thing as a bad idea part of the meeting. Convergent thinking is okay, now which idea is the one we're going to go with part. And just like any design-oriented iterative process, you can jump around and should absolutely iterate between these phases if need be. But let me start with the straightforward path. So the first diamond is the problem space. It begins with an initial insight. We have a problem, and you begin to diverge. You could deploy the traditional root cause analysis in this phase, asking the 5 whys or brainstorming the problems that you would as you were doing a fishbone diagram. But make sure that you're brainstorming as many of the possible causes as you can get to. You can think of it as an ecosystem analysis. It's very much a research initiative. If you have the time, speak to people who have experienced the problem, observe it in its natural habitat, get as many inputs as you can get. Once you've done your research and that diverging, you can now better understand the universe of the problem space, and it's time to converge. You want to synthesize all of the work that you've done so far, putting some structure around your problem space. This is the part of the meeting where you start dragging all of those Post-it notes together. What themes are we seeing in the different problems, and how are they related? It'll probably be difficult to create actual boxes and arrows type of graph for a wicked problem, but the point is to begin to converge on 2 things. One is a common understanding of what that problem space is, and the second is which part of the problem space you think you'll have the biggest impact in the rest of the ecosystem. This is the problem definition part of the process. If we were talking about product design, this part of the process would be where your product manager or your product owner would be creating features and acceptance criteria. It might be helpful to think about the problem definition in that way. It's not defining the how, it's defining the what. Where do you think you'll get the biggest bang for your buck if you tweak that part of the problem space? And what do you want the outcome of that tweak to look like? All right, so you've become very clear and defined what you think the biggest impact elements of your problem space are. And now it's time to solution. This is where the double diamond helps us again, because it's tempting to go back to our intuition and skip straight to implementing the most obvious solution. But we want to diverge again. Start brainstorming all of the possible solutions to the chosen problem. Designers use methods like crazy eights to encourage divergent thinking in the solutioning space. You ask your team to take 8 minutes to draw 8 solutions to a single problem. I think most brainstorming facilitation exercises would be useful here. The idea is to generate and evaluate many different solutions to the problem. What happened to my notes? Sorry, guys. And now it's time to converge again. Because you've been super clear about the problems you've been trying to solve and the outcome you want to see from the solution, you should be able to begin narrowing down your solutions to the ones that have the greatest potential impact for your problem. It's still not a straight shot, though, to a singular solution. This is where you should continue the build, measure, and learn loop until you gradually converge on a solution that moves the needle in the way that you've defined your problem. And there you have it, the design double diamond. Now, as with basically everything design, it's not always clear-cut. There are times in the solution space that you may go back to your first diamond, or you might skip this to the solution space right away because you're confident in the knowledge you already have about the problem definition. But the idea is to keep this tool in mind so that you don't get caught in the trap of always converging without asking yourself first, do I have a clear picture of the entirety of the problem space? Do I have a clear definition of the problem this product, process, document, or whatever is trying to solve? Have I given enough thought to the breadth of the possible solutions? And have I converged on this solution based on data? Okay, so let's shift over to some more practical implementation of the double diamond. I think this can be used in a variety of different ways. It could be applied over a series of iterations, taking 2 weeks for each phase of the process, really taking the time to go through each of those phases. But it could also be used as a week-long exercise. If you're familiar with the design sprint created by Google Venture, it follows the design double diamond. The first day is spent understanding the problem space, diverging with a bunch of research, and then converging and synthesizing that research into a map. The second day is a massive day of solutioning, diverging, and brainstorming. And the final day is converging on that solution, prototyping, testing, and beginning that build, measure, learn loop. So this is a week long, but I could also see a mini version of this coming out of a retro. In a typical retro, everyone lists what went well, what you need to improve, and you discuss possible action items. You're going straight to the solution to an assumed problem. Obviously, if the same challenge or problem is appearing, then most of us already know to schedule a root cause analysis session. And here's where we may suggest practicing employing the double diamond. You want to think, diverge, converge, diverge, and then converge. So diverge. Ask your team to list all of the things that might be causing this problem. Ask themselves to ask 5 or more whys, and getting it up there in Post-it notes. Converge. Have the team combine and categorize those problems. Vote for the highest impact one. Diverge. Brainstorm solutions to the chosen problem, and then converge and vote on the one that best solves the chosen problem. And now that is your action item. So I hope this was a helpful way of reframing root cause analysis and understanding your problem and solution spaces. But now I'm curious to hear from you. Do you have a wicked problem you want to try this with? or do you have any questions? I was not aware that we were going to have more of a panelist discussion, so I really am interested in hearing from you in the chat. So please feel free to chat, and I believe that we can unmute you if you've started chatting, so that we can have a little bit more of a conversation.
Yeah, we actually we definitely can. So if you either raise your hand, I think you either have that, or you put your question in, we can unmute you, and then you can ask Holly those questions.
Or talk to me about any wicked problems or how you think this might get applied in your work. So quiet. So I know one of the places that I have thought about applying this is where we were having issues where we seemed to be seeing a pattern of more and more bugs appearing. And the first intuition everybody had was to do a bugathon and just squash all the bugs, and that would be the end of it. But the more I started thinking and talking and doing the research and kind of diverging in the problem space, it was obvious that it wasn't like a one-time thing that we're going to be able to squash all the bugs and fix the problem. It was a number of different things that were in our process and our people, and so just starting to do that research and diverging of what the whole problem space helped. And then as you continue to, then we could figure out what all of those, the universe and ecosystem of problems were, and narrow in on one of the places where we thought we would have the biggest impact. So it was, you know, the fact that there were a lot of handoffs between two teams, and those handoffs seemed to be problematic. And so we continued to iterate on a solution of how to fix those handoffs. So that one of many different examples, but I think we have some people that are raising hands, so yeah. I'm going to let other people talk.
Amanda has a question, and I think, Amanda, if you are able to talk.
Yeah, can you hear
Awesome.
me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. And Holly, you may have just kind of already addressed this, but I was wondering if you had a more concrete example that you might sort of walk us through briefly, where you employed this this technique to address a larger issue or set of issues.
Yeah. So I did, talked about that bug squashing kind of example, and I think the thing about the design double diamond, like I said, that helps the most is that it's especially when you feel like you've gotten caught in the trap where you're like, oh wait, we tried a solution and it turns out that this isn't, that we're still having the problem. It helps to really take the time to diverge. And like I said, a lot of agile practitioners or people that are familiar with Six Sigma could still use those root cause analysis tools to understand the problem space. But I find it very helpful to think of it purposefully in this part of the meeting, we're going to diverge first. Like, let's not talk at all about the solution, only about the problem. And let's not even talk about the problem. We're talking about the universe of the problems before moving on to, okay, like, obviously this is very complex, and let's hone in now on where we're interested in solutioning. I hope that did answer your question.
Yeah, thank you.
So can Teresa go next? If you can unmute.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wondered if you know of anyone who's actually used this to make architectural design decisions with in more complex applications? And if you know of any, that how successful would, did they think that was to use this approach?
Yeah, no, I don't know anybody that's used it in an architectural design approach, but I would be very interested. I think it's very applicable to any designing, solutioning kind of exercise, and particularly the complex ones, because you're intentionally trying to take the time to diverge and converge a couple of times. Do you have something in mind? I'd be interested to hear kind of how you might approach it.
I think it might be too complex for this conversation. Actually, it's all wrapped up in Kubernetes and the cloud and tooling and everything like that. But we get into a lot of situations where there are a lot of tooling choices and a lot of third-party applications that can be used as, a supporting platform to your actual application. And so you just become so complex. And in that environment too, I could see this being something that we could use for the whole problem approach too, because a lot of, things that go wrong, there are just these multiple layers of things.
Yeah.
So I had not seen this before, but this is really interesting. Thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. I'll try to take this back and try it out on my DevOps team.
Yeah, and it's helpful. I didn't go into a lot of detail about it because every problem is different, and so I can't tell you what your ecosystem analysis would look like. But it sounds, I suspect that like even if you chose a new tool, it would probably have knock-on effects all over the place. And as you go through that analysis and that converging or that diverging part of it, understanding kind of where all the knock-on effects would be, the secondary and tertiary effects of changing this tool or adding a new tool. And then diverging on, okay, here's the universe of things that might change and the ripple effects, but trying to get very specific about what ripple effects if you start talking about changing that one tool, what are the things that everybody starts to get excited about? Like, oh, well, if we can make an impact in that part of this ecosystem, I think and if that impact could do the following things, that would be awesome. And then you can get into the solution.
No, thank you, because, it really resonated when you said ripple effect. So maybe that's the real right approach to something like this type of application of this method. So that really resonated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Holly, I had a question. So how do we, no worries. We've worked together, of course. So given the agile construct and of course the implementation thereof, so how do we marry these, right? Is there an approach? Is there something that you can kind of talk to us about marrying it? Because I'm assuming there is some lead time associated with this, and then given that iterative cadence that we have from an agile perspective, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I tried at the end to give that example of the fact that it could be something that you do in the moment. It does not have to take a long time, but instead you could time box it into like, wait a second, before we jump straight to a solution, in this retro, let's time box and do 10 separate minutes before we jump to the solution. But then also in an agile process, another reason why I kind of ulterior motive of bringing this up is because the idea of giving your designers and being involved in the process of this design double diamond during agile, in an agile project is kind of important, like understanding that it can take some time to really understand the problem before you jump to a solution. And so if you are having something that that seems like a wicked problem, you can think about breaking out the tasks that you're performing per iteration into these phases so that you're not stuck with going to a solution because you're like, oh, well, I need to solve this problem and I have a sprint to do it. Instead, kind of say, all right, we're going to take a sprint just to diverge. We're going to take a sprint to converge, and understanding the problem in that way. And then obviously the last part of that double diamond when you are converging on the solution should be a build, measure, learn loop, which I hope most Agile practitioners are familiar with, the kind of Kaizen practice.
Thank you so much, Holly, for answering that. And so I don't know, but there were actually two other questions, and they're along actually the same line. So I don't know if you can see those questions in Q&A.
Yeah, I can. So Toby was asking, divergence and convergence, the essence of the double diamond, can also be used in Agile facilitation, breakout rooms and readouts. Holly, what tips do you have in using something like this in, sorry, my chat is, a setting with stakeholders for strategic road mapping? Yeah, absolutely. I think in any facilitation where you're strategizing, and I think my design quote at the beginning talked about design is essentially strategy. This process can be used. As a product manager, a lot of what I hear myself saying over and over again is, well, but what is the outcome we're looking for? And that's where I think kind of staying in the problem space for a while before jumping to solutions will help your stakeholders to understand. Because another thing about Agile is that you want autonomous teams, you want those teams to figure out the what. And so when you're doing that strategic road mapping and the stakeholder facilitation, helping them to understand, okay, there will be time for solutioning, but right now we want to get out of your head what the problem is, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do some convergence, or some divergence, and then some convergence. Did that answer your question, Toby?
Yes, Holly, sorry, I took time getting off mute. No, that's perfect. Yeah, and sometimes we don't have the luxury of a lot of time, and perhaps taking a smaller subset of problems might help as well. Would you agree with that, or do you have some alternate thoughts?
Yeah, no, I do, and that's part of the convergence, part of the double diamond, though. And the more you do this, because I mean, we are talking about wicked problems and complex problems. So the more you do it, the less real divergence you have to do, because hopefully you've done it enough times that you start to have that knowledge throughout the organization of the whole problem space. And you'll put some more input based on all of the experiments you've done so far in the solutioning space and any new data that you have into that divergence again to say, okay, like, have we learned anything new about the ecosystem and all of the problems? And now where do we want to focus next? So given this ecosystem, where do we think now is going to have the bigger impact? So it helps to kind of focus the conversation into, especially those divergent areas, into, you know, what is the biggest impact? Understanding that there is a whole ecosystem, and we're not going to ignore the ecosystem of all of the different problems, but we are going to converge on a few outcomes that we want to solve for today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't boil the ocean, just focus on an area. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I think we also have a question from Aaron. So his question is, have you used quarterly maps with it?
I have not. Aaron, I don't know if you want to come off mute and explain what Wardley maps is. I'm interested to learn.
Yep, give me a second.
I feel like I need to Google it now.
All right, Aaron, you should be unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so Wordly maps are just really a technique to be able to break down or map the structure of a service, or some type of entity. And they're named after this guy Simon Wardley, who basically came up with this technique around 15 years ago, and it's all pretty much open source. It's available out there, and there's sort of a kind of a whole community around it. I mean, this looks like this would be a really good approach to kind of to basically work with Wordley maps and other liberating structures. So that's where that all came from, if that makes any sense. I mean, it's hard to do like a 30-second introduction to Wordley maps. They're a little more complicated. I mean, I hate saying complicated, but they kind of are. I mean, they kind of give you a way to sort of tease out, everything that's going on in a service, whether it's a government. Actually, a lot of governments are using it now. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the resource. I will definitely be looking into that. It sounds useful.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the biggest challenges when talking about real complex problems and using this model, is that in that divergent space, it's sometimes hard to converge again and get that kind of common understanding of what the ecosystem is and what all of the problems are. But I will look into these Wordley maps.
I mean, one of the nice things about Wordley maps is it allows you to sort of define value and define sort of the different roles of value that might exist, and to sort of figure out the maturity in it. And so that could be interesting with the double diamond, because you could sort of weigh different components, right? Kind of creating a weighting schedule or scoring model.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it would be easier to measure in the solution space whether or not your solution is having the right impact on that score, and be very clear about what score impact you're hoping to see. Like, well, if we do the right solution, then we would expect this score to move in this way.
Yep, exactly. Thank you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.